Thanks. I see some of you are introducing yourselves. Nice to see all the different countries you represent. So please do continue with your name, organization, and country, and welcome to all of you. Okay, so we are now at the top of the hour. So hello to all of you. I'm Andrea Rother. I am a professor and head of the Environmental Health Division at the University of Cape Town in South Africa. And you are most welcome to today's discussion. If you are just joining, again, please do introduce yourselves with your name, country, and organization, as it helps all of us to get to know each other. So I'd also like to just let you know that we have Natasha Lalou in the background, who's the technical and administrative support. If you have any technical issues, you can go to the WhatsApp group. There is a link, and she will sort out those issues for you. If you're new or you need a reminder of the University of Cape Town, particularly the divisions, Pesticide Discussion Forum, and what the purpose is really for us to bring together representatives from different regions, different sectors, different stakeholder groups, to really foster a community that's mutually supporting of stakeholders to discuss various issues related to pesticides. And really what we're trying to do is build the capacity of regulators and researchers and NGOs and others in low and middle income countries, and to discuss emerging issues related to pesticide use. And you'll see today's issue on drones is very much an emerging issue. And we hope to achieve this by learning from each other, sharing information and data, identifying gaps and problem solving together to reduce and prevent pesticide poisonings, chronic effects, and environmental contamination, really with a view to a toxic-free future for the next generation. So this is not a webinar, but rather a discussion, and that's why we've been encouraging you to introduce yourselves into the chat room so that you become familiar with it, because that's where the discussion will take place. The presenter today will speak and keep his video and mic on, but everyone else will be muted. It's a nonpartisan group, which means we respect each other's viewpoints, even though we might not agree. If you do make a question or comment or response, it does always help if you add your country so that we don't have to look back where you're from. And we do encourage you to engage with each other as well, if you have questions for each other or comments that you'd like to make. So we'll have 3 questions today. That will be a short presentation for each one. And then there'll be time for you to respond to a question. There'll be some poll questions as well on Mentimeter, and we'll do that for 3 questions. So as I mentioned today, we're going to be looking at the discussion of applying pesticides with drones. And this is an important topic for many countries, as it's a new method of application coming in and has other issues and questions related to that. We're very honored to welcome back Grant Stark, who has been with us before to discuss this topic. So Grant, you are most welcome and thank you. He heads up the Evidence Committee and New Technologies team in the Chemicals Regulation Division at the United Kingdom, I nearly said University of Cape Town, United Kingdom Health and Safety Executive. He has worked in a variety of roles related to pesticide regulation for almost 30 years, preparing authorization documentation, setting maximum residue limits in foodstuffs, and arranging monitoring programs and promoting more sustainable use of chemicals. His current role includes regulation of new technologies, such as drones, and he's chair of the OECD subgroup that's currently developing guidance for regulatory authorities on how to assess human and environmental risks arising from the application of pesticide drones. And I hope you will use this opportunity to really ask questions from your different countries, your different regions in relations to drones. So thank you again, Grant, for giving of your time. And I hand over to you to lead us for the first question. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrea. And it's good to be back. I think it was last April last time was here. I can't believe that the last 12 months have gone by so quickly. But when I was here last time, I did sort of promise to come back with an update on our work to sort of help develop approaches to regulating the drone spraying of pesticides. We did get a lot out of the last meeting we had with you guys, and I'm sort of very hopeful that we'll have a sort of similar experience today. As Andrea was saying, I'm sort of chair of the OECD Working Party for Pesticides Drone subgroup. But my day job is as a sort of policy officer in the Chemicals Regulation Division of the UK Health and Safety Executive. And we are the central government body here that's responsible for the approval and authorization of pesticides. I'm sort of joined here today by a number of other members of the OECD subgroup. I've got Sally de Marcellus, who provides secretariat support. She's based in the OECD in sort of Paris. Also, sort of Greg Watson from Bayer and Hector Portillo from FMC, sort of key players on the group. And Sarah Havinga from Bayer is also sort of joining us today. And Greg, Sarah, and Hector have been sort of movers and shakers in developing these best management practices that we're going to discuss later this afternoon. And I know they'll be very interested to hear what you've got to say on the draft documentation that you've been looking at. Also joined today by one of my HSE colleagues who works very sort of closely with me on the policies associated with the sort of drone spraying, and that's sort of Rachel Merrick. So I would say if you do have any sort of questions as a result of the presentation or the issues that we discuss after the meeting, any questions arise afterwards, please get in touch with either myself and or Rachel, and we'd be happy to discuss with you. Just want to emphasize that any sort of views that are expressed here today, they will be mine or authors of sort of papers, and not necessarily, or they won't be the views or the policies of the OECD and or its sort of member countries. So with that by way of an introduction, Natasha, can we just go on to the first slide, please? The next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, so just a little bit of a sort of reminder of where we are on drones. As you'll know, they're a relatively new technology that are used for the application of pesticides, but they do have the ability, especially when used in conjunction with other technologies, to improve the sort of sustainability of the use of these chemicals. This is largely through precise and more better timed applications. The challenge for us as sort of regulators at the moment is to ensure that we have a sufficient understanding of the risks that are associated with pesticides applied by drone. This is really to assure ourselves that human health and environmental exposures resulting from the application won't result in harm or have unacceptable effects. Also got to make sure that any sort of regulatory approach that we put in place is proportionate to the risks that exist and does not impede, or you would ideally want it to facilitate, the adoption of sort of potentially sort of helpful new technologies. So the initial sort of work that our OECD drone subgroup has done is detailed here on this slide. And one of the sort of key findings we established that there didn't appear to be a readily identifiable suite of regulatory quality data and information that would enable regulators to make assessments to understand the risks that come from products applied by drones. And the findings were detailed in the report that you see here on this slide. See that we looked at all the different component parts of the pesticide risk assessment process. But as those of you who are present at the previous discussion will recall, there's a particular focus on risks to human health and the environment resulting from the spray drift from the drones and the risks to operators from handling, filling and cleaning operations. It's here that the risk resulting from drone operations appear to have the potential to differ most markedly or significantly from the more traditional forms of application equipment that are currently in use. So on drift, discussing how factors such as flying practice and the design of the drone can influence drift. So you're looking at things like the height and the speed above the crop, the number and the power of rotors that you see on the drone, how they were configured and how they're sort of positioned relative to the nozzles. sort of the types of nozzles themselves. All of these things can all have an impact on the drift that comes from the product applied by drone. Not only drift, but also the way the drift interacts with the crop canopy, and so its efficacy in treating the pests, and the ability of the chemical to then move to soil and potentially be washed off through the ground and spread more widely in the environment. So you see that this issue of sort of drift, the effect of sort of downwash from the rotors that are attached to the drone can actually make on the risk profile of pesticide products. So a very sort of key area. And the other area is this business of operator exposure. So we're trying to develop and understand what a typical working day looks like for those who work with drones. So you're talking about handling and filling operations, cleaning the drones, disposing of sort of product and washings, and what this means for the amount of chemical that a worker may be exposed to during the day, and others who may be in the vicinity of the drone spraying operation. So that's kind of sort of setting out what the issues were that needed to be addressed, and that took us up to October 2021 when this report was published. We'll just move on to the next slide, Natasha. Thank you. So this is where sort of the OECD is going now. The work of the drone subgroup has evolved. We established what we called a task and finish group that has organised and is overseeing a programme of work arranged around a series of work packages that are designed to pull together sort of key information, data and tools that will enable assessments to be made on the risks associated with sort of drone spraying. The idea is that the OECD will then offer commentary on the strengths and the weaknesses of the various data, tools and information. And it will then be up to member countries around the world to take a judgment on what they make of the OECD views, what their own view is on how drone spraying should be carried out. But we would hope that the OECD view would be fairly influential in that. Now, the sort of the key activity that's being done here is around this issue of assessing drift, as you might imagine. And the work package that's been put together here is seeking to identify, well, the first step was to seek to identify what existing data might be of sufficient quality to be used as a basis for regulatory assessment. And the initial work that we did here didn't uncover a great deal of data of a regulatory sort of quality. There is some, but not a sort of huge amount. So the plan is for this sort of data, this initial data that we've identified, to be supplemented by data generated by work which the crop protection industry is currently funding. And there's a significant sort of program of work, some sort of $4 million being invested in a series of trials to generate additional drift data. And hopefully as a result of all of these different exercises, we'll eventually have a sufficient weight of data and evidence that will start enabling us to make judgments on the degree of drift. And associated with that, the industry task force that is driving this new data generation program has developed some guidance on how to conduct sort of drift trials, so the data will be of a suitable quality for regulatory authorities. What will then happen is the next stage of the process will be to develop a drift curve for use by regulators and others, and there are sort of models that will enable different sort of parameters to be adjusted and drift sort of calculated. But that's a much a longer term project over the course of the next sort of next couple of years. So the other priority of work is this operator exposure sort of issue, understand what the average working day looks like. And so activity is being undertaken to understand what this might look like. Sort of surveys of sort of practice, understand, for example, how many handling and filling operations take place during a day, what the spray sort of product sort of looks like that's put into the drone tank. And say that will be sort of supplemented by these best management practices document that we're going to look at later this afternoon. So all of this designed to help us as regulators understand what a working day looks like and what likely exposures may be for the workers. So for completeness, we've got other bits of work sort of looking at types of drones and their configurations and the impact this might have on the risk profile. And this is being led by our colleagues in Australia. Another area is looking at the hardware, the drones themselves, and the desirability of them sort of benefiting from an upgrade in design in certain features to help sort of minimize risks associated with their use. And we're fortunate that the subgroup contains a member who's very sort of closely involved with the ISO standards work that's going on at the moment to set standards relating to sort of drone spraying. So that does give us an opportunity to influence some of that work. And finally, what I said we do is, as a group, we'll look to sort of pool all of this work together. It'll be summarized in a closing report from the subgroup, identifying the strengths and the weaknesses in sort of methodologies, data, information that's been developed. And that will be passed to the main OECD group, which is the Working Party for Pesticides, which will adopt a formal sort of report on these different ways of regulating drones, and will then be available for regulatory authorities around the world. Okay, next slide, Natasha, please. Thanks. Okay, so just to bring you sort of right up to date, sort of 2 weeks ago, HSE hosted a conference which was sponsored by the OECD's Cooperative Research sort of program. And this event, it was a unique gathering of experts, and it was designed to sort of pool knowledge, expertise, and promote this sort of shared understanding of the issues and current state of knowledge and developments related to the application of pesticides by drone. So there were approximately 100 speakers and delegates in the conference hall, and we had another 30 delegates who joined us online. So it was a significant and large event. The speakers and the delegates, they came from the Americas, Europe, Asia, and Australasia, and the Far East. And we had all the sort of the key stakeholder groups in attendance. So you had the aviation and the pesticide regulatory communities, the researchers and standard setters, sort of drone spraying operators, and the crop protection, farm, and other relevant industries. So you say it was a very sort of unique gathering of experts, but say reassuringly that the conference did confirm that the work we've been doing at OECD level to build the evidential base to determine and mitigate the risks from drone spraying, it said that was all focused in the right sort of areas. This conference did hold a series of workshops to discuss the best management practices, and we'll be hearing we'll be looking at the best management practices shortly. So information was sort of shared on approaches in different countries and work being taken to build that evidential base on different areas of the risk assessment. So an off-site movement, we heard a very initial sort of analysis of data, which is suggesting that spray drift from a drone is certainly greater than that you get from ground-based equipment, but less than that comes from helicopters and airplanes. And indeed, it tended to map fairly closely to some of the orchard-based sort of spray systems we have, certainly here in the UK. I would emphasize that these are very early sort of findings, but they do provide a basis or a clue as to how sort of regulatory regimes might view this particular risk in the future. Also heard how there is a model which exists at the moment, which seems to deliver fairly encouraging results in predicting what likely drift deposition would be from a drone. So we'll be looking a bit more at the potential of this model as an international reference point for regulators. Now, as I said, work is underway to accumulate a sufficient mass of drift data to ensure ourselves that we do have a sufficient weight of evidence to draw robust conclusions on drift. And certainly that industry task force work and series of trials that I mentioned will be very key here. Other thing the conference sort of looked at was operator exposure. And we had a sort of research that's been conducted in a rice growing scenario on Thailand, which used a tracer product, showed that the exposure of a drone pilot was much lower than that of the mixer and loader, so the folks who are working with the chemical on the drone. Where the mixer and the loader wore a layer of clothes and gloves, exposures were reduced by a very significant amount, so the 98%, and confined mainly to the gloves, so highlighting the importance of appropriate PPE for workers. Exposures were much lower than those expected from handheld applications. So again, giving some sort of reference point from the relative risks that can come from drone work. That said, there's still much to do here to develop a suitable exposure model and assessment for operator exposure, but it does appear that the preparation of products and loading are the critical parts of the operation in terms of determining the risks to operators. So the York event, it reinforced and ensured a shared understanding of obligations and approaches taken by the aviation and the pesticide regulators to manage our respective risks. I think it was also important in demonstrating how governmental structures, for example, the federal and state provision, the wider technological developments, scientific advances, culture, pressures from within society, and global and local markets are all influencing the uptake of drone spraying. And it's the wish of regulators to ensure that society can derive the benefits of drone spraying without compromising the absolute necessity of protecting human health and the environment. At the conference, we did notice that countries and jurisdictions had different attitudes to aerial spraying and drone spraying, and we're at different stages in terms of authorizing the application of pesticides by drones. Now, all of these factors, they will be very important in helping policymakers and the wider community understand that countries do have different views and/or issues to address. And I think this will be particularly relevant and helpful to bear in mind when we're considering the best management practices document, especially if it's designed to have this global reach. I think it's always useful here to bear in mind that when we're talking about drone spraying, the focus is very much on the chemical, understanding what the likely levels of resulting exposures will be. Pesticide regulation, certainly in the UK, doesn't generally focus on the application equipment, except where this is critical in determining the risk profile of the chemical. And indeed, it's relatively rare that our pesticide authorizations actually specify use of particular application equipment. So we'll wait to see what the evidence says on drones before we decide whether in the UK we will actually go ahead with developing drone-specific pesticide applications, or whether they will sit in a more general category. So that's all I wanted to say by way of introduction. So what I would like to do now, Natasha, is move on to the next slide, which is introducing the best management practices. And what I'll do, I'll give a short introduction here, and then introduce the first of the questions and the poll questions that flow from that. Now, on the best management practices, it says, as I mentioned, a key part of the conference was a review of these draft best management practices documents, which were prepared by the industry task force. And you'll be aware it's not possible for regulators to specify in detail practices that must be followed for every type of scenario in which a pesticide is applied. And this is where best practice guidance can have a role to play in complementing regulatory requirements. If these sorts of practices are shared widely enough, if they're adopted by a sufficient number of practitioners, societies can have assurances that users have sufficient information to make informed choices about how they plan and carry out pesticide applications. So the best management practice document is designed to provide general guidance to farmers, to service providers, crop protection companies, and extension and research personnel on the key parameters impacting such as spray drift and other exposures. So it applies to the use of sort of single and multi-rotor sort of vehicles and drones of various payloads and sizes, with spray booms or nozzles attached under the rotors. So the guidance covers a number of different topics. It picks out sort of requirements in key countries and territories. So you sort of see the key areas that are covered in the document are things such as product efficacy, so sort of choosing the right product to do the job. Tank mixing, so preparing the spray solution. Environmental variables that can affect the spray drift. You've got the equipment, so preparing the drone and the spray equipment. And then sort of product labels and sort of making sure they're compatible with the drone application that's intended to take place. So what I'm proposing to do today is look at the draft best practice management practices document, initially at a sort of high level to try and sort of ascertain your views on its likely usefulness in a range of countries. As I said, in an ideal world, we would like this thing to have sort of global reach. And then we'll look to sort of seek some more detailed views on the environmental variables and equipment setup sections. Having said that, I mean, if you have sort of read through the document, you do have any sort of views on other areas, please feel free to put them in the chat. All this information will be sort of very helpful for the industry team that are putting this document together to ensure that it has sort of maximum usefulness. So as I said, the first thing I'd like to sort of you to do and sort of comment on is the documents and sort of principles of best practice as part of a control regime. And I'm sort of conscious that the document itself is prepared by folks who tend to work in jurisdictions with relatively sort of well-developed and sort of mature sort of regulatory regimes where best management practices and industry stewardship activities are a very sort of common feature. I'm sort of equally aware that this might not be something which is a feature of pesticide controls in all sort of countries. So one of the things I'd like to sort of understand is how well the concept of use and best management practices fit into your systems of control or systems of control that you're aware of, and then whether and how well the document identifies key issues that may exist in your particular sort of countries or areas with which you're familiar. Sort of following that, there are then sort of two poll questions. Firstly, looking at the document as a whole, grateful for any views on the structure and organization of topics, levels of detail and language that are used in the document, in particular understanding whether these are appropriate for helping readers to understand the document and the advice that it's providing. And then the sort of second poll question is around sort of consideration of the degree of challenge for pesticide users that is implied within the document. So is it a reasonable aspiration in all territories that we can expect pesticide users and or those who arrange for spray operations to be carried out to follow the sorts of practices that are outlined here? So sort of one question, sort of two sort of poll questions, and I'd be very interested to hear the comments and thoughts from folks that are on the call. Thank you.
Thanks, Grant. Well, you've been stimulating a lot of discussion because there are a lot of questions in the chat already. So I'm afraid you can hardly catch your breath. So just to say, please do keep posting your questions. Do put your country in, it helps. So what are the key topics and challenges associated with drone spraying in your country that best management practice could help address? So while you're responding to that, Grant, I will draw your attention to the questions that have been coming through. So we've had a question from Debbie from South Africa, who wanted to know if there's a standard drone size recommended for spraying.
No, there is no drone size recommended for spraying. I mentioned the sort of work that the Australian authorities are looking at the moment, developing a notion of standard drone types. I think what I would say, I mean, the sorts of drones we're looking at the moment are essentially the sort of single or sort of multi-rotor based sort of type thing, so more akin to sort of helicopter type sort of methods of sort of propulsion rather than airplane design. In terms of the best practices sort of spraying sort of documentation that I mentioned that had been developed by the industry task force, it's this sort of type of equipment that's being used as a, if you like, a sort of standard sort of drone or reference point for generation of drift data. So there are sort of basic sort of designs of 4/8 rotor sort of designs that we have in mind, with the boom or the nozzle sort of slung on underneath the drone is the type of sort of setup that we have in mind in terms of how we're evaluating risk at the moment. But we do recognize that the technology is advancing and that new drone designs may come along in the fullness of time, and there may be challenges for regulators in establishing how the risks from these new types of drone design differ from the ones that are currently assumed to be in operation. Thank you.
I think that's a very important point, your last point, and challenging very much for regulators, is that the technology changes and then the risks perhaps change. And so we use the technology before we've even fully assessed it. So moving on just to the second question, I do have noticed that your colleagues are also helping with answering some of the questions in the chat.
Super.
So thank you for that.
Yeah.
So Bruce from Zimbabwe has asked if drone application in agriculture can be used on all crops, and he particularly draws you to the example of grapes, where there's a canopy and leaves, and that it might be difficult for drone spraying in those circumstances. So can drones be used on all crops?
Yeah, I mean, so one of the things that we see in Europe certainly is that the sort of the grapevine seems to be sort of one of the areas that seems most sort of ripe for sort of development in terms of sort of drone technology. Some of that in Europe is down to the topography, very sort of steeply sloped sort of areas that traditional sort of application equipment has difficulty accessing, and it's much easier to get on there with a drone. But certainly some of these more sort of specialist uses, certainly in the UK, seem to have sort of greater technology. Orchards in sort of particular, you can see how you may be able to use the downwash that comes from the rotors on the drone to perhaps sort of drive the spray drift sort of into the canopy in a way that perhaps some of the other types of sort of application equipment that aren't used that are used at the moment isn't able to function in that sort of way. So I mean, I think it's, I mean, just thinking of a range of sort of cropping scenarios, I can't readily envisage one where drones couldn't sort of theoretically be used to apply a pesticide product. What is likely to be a sort of constraining factor, certainly in the initial stages, is cost. It's very much sort of cheaper to employ the traditional sort of boom spray technology, particularly in broad acre cropping scenarios, than drones at the moment. And certainly where the market is in the UK at the moment, our drone operators aren't looking to sort of compete with the broad acre spraying sort of guys. They're looking very much at sort of targeted and niche uses of the product. But so that's very early days in the UK market, and I suspect the UK market isn't representative of sort of wider uses around the globe. But to answer the question, I say in theoretical terms, I would think sort of drones are suitable for a very wide range of cropping practices. Thank you.
Thanks. which is different, I think, from aerial spraying. But we now have a poll question: how well is the information presented? And I'm assuming the information you're talking about is in the good management practices. So this will assume people have looked at it, so I'm not sure everyone will have. I'll move on to the next question. As I said, we have quite a few, so perhaps if you could just shortly answer them, because we'd like to move on. So, and if anything is, you could just ask your colleagues to respond in the chat, or we can come back to them. So Debbie wants to know, from South Africa, do drone operators need a civil aviation authority license in all countries?
Yeah, I can't speak for all countries, but certainly the ones that we are aware of, operation of sort of drones does require some sort of authority or approval from the aviation regulators, and that is something which is distinct and separate from the authorization that needs to be obtained from pesticide regulators to apply a pesticide product using a drone.
Okay, and she also asks whether drone application will be listed on the label. So I believe in the past, not in all countries, but in many countries, when pesticides are registered, it's indicated on the label in the past if it could be used for aerial application. So will drone application also be listed on the labels in future?
Again, very much up to individual sort of regulatory authorities to make that decision. I think in the UK we have a very sort of broad category of aerial application of pesticides. If it was what we don't want to do is create lots of different categories of pesticide authorization, different pesticide authorizations. If we can avoid it, we would look to do so. It would only be necessary if it was required to ensure that the risks from drone spraying were appropriately managed, that we would actually sort of specify use of particular application equipment. But I say I can only speak for the UK. I can't speak for regulators around the globe.
I think what will be key is, in any best practice guidance, is really giving guidance on labeling for drone application. Susan from Germany asks, was general exposure, so that beyond operator exposures, discussed, and how is it taken into account?
Yeah, I mean, this was one of the things that was touched upon in the operator exposure presentation that was made to the York conference, and if you like, sort of bystander or sort of pilot sort of exposure. So those who were not necessarily involved in the handling and filling operations, a very sort of small degree of sort of exposure expected from the drone spraying operation. So I say we've got some initial sort of findings on that, some encouraging findings, but more work to be done to sort of determine what bystander or pilot, those who are sort of slightly sort of divorced from the immediacy of the spray operation may be exposed to.
So I don't know if we're going to move on to the second poll. Do you want to make any, sorry, can we go back to the first poll? Before we go on to the second poll, would you like to make any comments on what you've seen in terms of the responses?
It's difficult just to quietly sort of keep track of everything that's going through. So I very much sort of appreciate the sort of help from my sort of colleagues in sort of dealing with any of the sort of questions that may have sort of come through. I mean, if there's any way of sort of capturing the sort of discussion and the sort of questions that have come through, if there's anything that I haven't sort of covered in the discussion here, I'd be very sort of happy to sort of pick that up and get back in touch with yourself, sort of, Andrea, and we could sort of share any sort of thinking with sort of folks on the comments that have come through.
That's fine. There will be a digest as well, and give you an opportunity to answer. We'll go on to the next poll now. But also, if any of your colleagues would like to speak, they can just raise their hand and we'll give them permission to speak. So the next one is, what do you feel about the degree of the challenge for pesticide users implied by the document? Again, this will be assuming that people have read the document. But I do have a few more questions while people are responding to this. So Silendile has asked, what are the requirements for grant licensing? I think it's drone licensing for using drones. So what are the requirements for licensing for using drones for spraying? Again, I know it will be country specific, but maybe you could just say, in your opinion, what would be like the key requirements in terms of licensing?
Okay, I mean, there's two sort of areas, isn't there? There's the aviation sort of legislation, and aviation legislators will have their own requirements. And I know here in the UK, there are sort of particular sort of requirements around the weight of the drone and sort of flying in sort of proximity to inhabited areas. So lots of sort of restrictions can be sort of placed in terms of flying practice. In terms of pesticide sort of regulation, I think the two key areas that we've identified immediately here in the UK is this business of establishing what spray drift looks like. So we have asked folks who've come to us to give us some spray drift data to sort of show what exposures are likely to be resulting from that. We've also asked them to describe what the average sort of working day is going to look like for a drone spraying operator, in order that we can start to make some assessment of operator exposure assessments. Now, in the fullness of time, I say when the crop protection companies, if and when the crop protection companies get around to reformulating their pesticide products for use in specifically in sort of drones, there may be issues associated with the efficacy of the product. So trials may have to be conducted to demonstrate that these reformulated sort of products are efficacious. And there's a bit of work that Canada is doing at the moment to just to sort of confirm that the spray or the residues that result in treated crops and foodstuffs from drone spray operations isn't sort of significantly different from that exists from normal forms of spraying.
So perhaps I could tack on Boyani's question, where he's saying, does a person have to be, should people be licensed for operating a drone? And it's an interesting question, because I have my own opinions, but I would be interested to hear what you think.
Again, there's the aviation sort of legislation angle, and again, aviation legislators will have their own requirements around the ability to safely fly a drone. Of course, that's sort of distinct and separate from the ability to apply a pesticide sort of product safely. Now, the sort of very initial view that we have here in the UK is that aviation legislation covers safe flying of a drone. So how to fly at the right sort of height, ensure it's at the right sort of speed, that it's not going to stray from the area where you're intending it to fly. So we're thinking, as a pesticide regulator, well, the big risk then sort of seems to be around the handling and filling of the chemical into the drone, the cleaning of the drone afterwards. And in some respects, much of that sort of activity seems to be very equivalent, or broadly equivalent, to sort of handling and filling of knapsack sprayers, or it seems to be sufficiently close to handling and filling of knapsacks or the sprayers. Now, I say that is a very initial sort of early view. So at the moment, we are advising drone operators in the UK, look, if you have a qualification in general safe use of pesticides if you feel, if you have the knapsack qualification, that is good enough for us at this stage in terms of the risks that we understand from drone spraying operations. That's not to say that in the fullness of time, when we may move to a position that says, no, we would like you to have a drone specific qualification. But I say that's very much the view from the UK, very much an initial view, but it's something that we'll keep under review.
Well, I think you make a very good point that there's two aspects to the licensing. So one is actually the drone being able to fly it from the aviation authority perspective and getting that type of license, and then actually in the whole aspect of handling pesticides and preventing drift and all of that. So there has been other comments about, whether some experience could be shared about licensing and drone spraying. And I made a note that FAO is in the process of developing a guidance note on drones. And I think licensing is a very important issue. I think given in time, because of time, we'll move on to question 2. I don't know if you wanted to comment on anything that you saw on the poll. Sorry, could we just go back to the poll? I don't know if you want to comment on anything that you see there before we move on.
Yeah, folks just picking up sort of drift being the challenge. The challenge is high. Yeah. Costs definitely sort of, costs of sort of generating sort of drift data sort of remain an issue, and Peter has been I think has acted as a wee bit of an impediment at times in the UK to sort of development as sort of practice. So I mean, so some sort of very familiar sort of themes sort of coming out there in the comments that I'm seeing, Andrea.
Yeah, good, thanks. So there are some other questions. I'll try to bring them in, but for the moment we'll move on to question 2, and I'll bring in other questions later. Thanks.
Okay. Okay, so the next area I want to look at is the one of environmental variables, and whether and how they should or can be taken into account when planning a spray operation. And you'll see that the best management practices document highlights the influence that particularly weather can have on spray operations. So a key factor here is the ability of the weather to impact on the aim of confining spray to the target area. Of course, we don't say that we're not looking for an absolute of no drift, as in some cases some element of drift is necessary to enable the spray solution to reach its target. But the issue here is that sort of drift must be carefully controlled. So wind, temperature, surface temperature inversion might all be factors that can impact on drift. I do have to say this issue of sort of surface temperature inversion was the subject of much debate at the York conference, and I know my sort of industry colleagues are reflecting on some of the discussions there. So you'll see that the document identifies that the optimal conditions for spraying is when wind is between sort of 3 and 10 miles an hour. But there's the risk of sort of spraying outside of these parameters can be sort of compensated for in some way by adjusting the size of spray droplets, taking account of wind direction, and following any buffer zone obligations or requirements from the label. Effect the high sort of wind speeds on the stability of the drone itself also needs to be taken account of. So the guidance notes that the sort of low humidity and sort of high temperatures, that these sorts of things can result in a risk of poor spray coverage and drift due to factors such as evaporation. So the suggestion is that you increase droplet size, use higher application volumes, 2 to 5 times more water, and or choose low drift nozzles or time spray operations to coincide with cooler parts of the day where humidity is higher. So the document also contains a table that indicates the risks associated with spraying at particular temperatures and humidities. See, the guidance then includes some reference to the surface temperature inversion issue and the risks. And say the risk is that sort of suspended sort of droplets are then sort of trapped under a layer of warm air. You then move up and out and away from the target area and eventually come to ground some distance away. So the guidance contains some information that might help users to identify when a thermal inversion might be present. So the final topics sort of covered in this bit of the guidance is take account of environmentally sensitive areas. And the suggestion in the document is to follow instructions on product labels, particularly with regard to buffer zones. So suggest taking account of sort of precipitation, sort of notes the rain fastness issue, and they'll sort of spraying early in the morning or the evening, shutting off nozzles when making turns at the ends of rows, or over irrigation ditches and other waterways. So for question 2, say we would like your views on what you consider to be the environmental risks that arise from drone spraying and are specific to this form of application. So an issue to consider for this work that's being done is whether the document should be very sort of drone focused, or whether there is sort of merit including more general guidance that's applicable to all types of spray operations. But yeah, very interested in your views, particularly in relation to drones. And then for the 2 polls, firstly, do you think that the guidance contains any helpful or meaningful information on droplet size and weather parameters for pesticide users in your country? And secondly, what are the key issues in your country with regards to pesticides and potential adverse environmental impacts, and how might sort of drone spraying impact these? So again, sort of 1 question, sort of 2 polls, and very interested to hear what you guys have got to say. And because it starts straying into quite sort of techie areas, I don't know if sort of if Greg, Sarah, and Hector are on the call and able to sort of help out here, would be sort of much appreciated if we get into any sort of very technical sort of discussions. Thank you.
Thanks, Grant. So we'll continue with people posting their responses to the question that you've posed. Just going back to some earlier questions, Leston had posted actually a question which I don't think you'll be able to answer, but it's, which countries in the SADC region, so the Southern African Development Community, have regulations in place to control drone application. And I do see that quite a few country representatives have responded, and we will try and do a table in the digest to indicate from not just the SADC countries, but perhaps all the countries that are represented on the call today, whether they're doing drone application or not, and whether they have regulations or not. It would be very nice. So if you haven't posted yet, whether you're doing drone application or you're aware of drone application in your country, and whether there's regulation or not, if you could post that in the chat, we'll use that then in the digest. Gift wanted to know how effective are buffer zones with drones?
Again, will very much sort of depend on the degree of drift that exists. To say they are a useful and recognised form of mitigation. Say in the UK, just using an example, there are certain pesticide sort of products that attract a buffer zone of 150 meters, sort of adjacent to watercourses when applied in an aerial sort of setting. We see buffer zones of up to 50 meters sort of applied with some of the orchard type equipment that we have in the UK. And in other cases, buffer zones of 5 or 6 meters from some of the more sort of traditional sort of boom spraying equipment. So they are a method which can be sort of deployed to protect the likes of sort of water courses or the environmentally sort of sensitive areas in terms of sort of reducing drift, of course, they're not the only sort of mitigation measures. We can have things such as low drift nozzles employed or used. So I think the goal is really that there should be a reduction or a percentage of the drift which reaches something like a watercourse or an environmentally sort of sensitive area, and the amount which reaches it shouldn't then sort of trigger any adverse effects. But yeah, buffer zones are one of a series of sort of tools of sort of mitigation that can be used to manage exposures.
Thanks for that. So there's another question from Lucienne, who asks, what knowledge do we have on the health risks of people living near spraying sites compared to other methods?
Again, I can sort of speak for the UK and sort of research that I'm that I'm aware of sort of here. Just generally the health of people who live adjacent to sort of sprayed areas is no worse than that of the general population. The sort of tests on sort of urine and blood of sort of pesticides that are detected in their body are at sort of levels that are entirely in accordance with what's expected by the pesticide risk assessment process, and that process is designed to ensure that any exposures that folks would have is well below any levels that should sort of trigger adverse health effects. So I'm kind of, sort of reassured by those sorts of findings. They suggest that we've got the very sort of precautionary regulatory regimes that we operate seem to be sort of managing exposures in the way that were anticipated, and should not be given rise to any adverse sort of health effects from people who live close to sort of spray operations.
Thanks, Grant, for that. So Leah from Canada asks, would over-application be a problem with drones? And how good is the monitoring of drone application at the moment of what is being used? Thanks.
Yeah, sort of over sort of application, as they can cover a number of sort of things. Obviously, it's very important that the drone is flown in an appropriate way, so it's the right height above the sort of crop, so that you don't get what we call sort of double sort of swathing, for example, where the two spray cones sort of overlap. You obviously need the drone to fly at the right sort of speed to ensure that the product goes on properly. Also, care needs to be sort of taken when the drone turns at the end of a row to come backwards. Obviously, so the product itself needs to be mixed in the right sort of way. It needs to sort of be needs to sort of come out of the nozzles at the right sort of rate. So a whole sort of range of sort of factors sort of come into play to ensure that sort of drone spray is to ensure that the correct amount of product is applied to the target. As for sort of monitoring sort of drone spraying operations, say in the UK at the minute, we've had a very limited number of sort of drone spraying operations. They were initially granted on an experimental basis, and certainly for the first few operations, there were government sort of inspectors on hand just to sort of view those operations taking place. Now, obviously, it's not possible when sort of drone spraying is done at a commercial level for each sort of operation to be sort of overseen. So there will certainly be interest and an attempt to sort of understand the impact of drone spraying sort of operations in a sort of practical sense by regulators when initial authorizations are granted. and that will just be to ensure that the products are behaving as predicted by the risk assessment process, that operators are following instructions on product labels. I think in the fullness of time, we want to get to a position where sort of drone spraying is considered equivalent, normal to any sort of operation. But yeah, I mean, I think you can, as read, that there will be interest and focus on drone spraying in the very sort of early days of use of the technology. But in the fullness of time, I think the expectation or hope is that it's then just considered normal spray operations.
Thanks, Grant. We have another question from Debbie from South Africa. So how do you calculate or monitor the double swathing? Is there an onboard monitoring program or flight monitoring track as on a helicopter?
Again, I wonder whether any of my sort of colleagues that are on the call are more familiar with the technology, but certainly drones I have seen, they can effectively be sort of pre-programmed before they go off and do the spray job. So there are sensors on the machine that will maintain a set height above the sort of crop. It will make adjustments as the weight of the drone sort of decreases as the sort of spray fluid is used up. It will fly the drone at a constant speed. It can sort of turn off the nozzles when sort of drones are turning. So there's a high degree of sort of intelligent sort of automation goes into the drone spraying operation to avoid some of these issues, such as sort of double swathing, and ensure that we have the best possible sort of coverage of or most appropriate sort of coverage from the spray.
So I see we haven't got any posts yet on the second poll. What are the key issues in your country with regards to pesticides and potential adverse environmental impacts? And how might drone spraying impact this? I think people are quite busy in the chat. There was a question from Sumit, and I'm not sure if I'll try and see if I can get your question right. I think you're reposting it. So it was about spray recommendations from knapsack to drone. So is there a difference, or are there spray recommendations when there's a movement from using knapsack sprayers to drone spraying? Different guidance.
Yeah, I mean, so part of one of the issues that we're sort of looking to explore here is the extent to which this guidance that we're looking at today is very much sort of drone specific, and how much it should draw in general best practice guidance that's applicable to all types of pesticide sort of application. And it can be sort of quite a difficult sort of judgment to make. So I mean, there's undoubtedly general guidance that applies to all types of pesticide application equipment when you're using it, and there will be particular bits of guidance that are very applicable just to handling and filling and using a drone. But just go back to that sort of earlier point, certainly in the UK, sort of work that we're doing seems to suggest that handling and filling a drone, cleaning it down, disposal of washings afterwards, looks fairly or sufficiently equivalent to sorts of practices that are employed with sort of knapsack sprayers, certainly here in the UK, to make it broadly equivalent. And what this does, it kind of draws in the wider issue of this sort of balance of sort of protecting human health and the environment, which is obviously the key aim of our sort of regulatory system, but also bearing in mind the issue of sort of regulatory and administrative burdens. So what we don't want to do is unnecessarily sort of create an obligation for drone spraying operators to have to undergo the time and expense of taking drone specific training on handling and filling if they've got the relevant sort of expertise and knowledge, because the knapsack training has given them that. So there is that sort of element that sort of plays into our sort of considerations. But as I should sort of emphasize that it's all about sort of protection of sort of human health and the environment. That's the overriding thing that will sort of dictate what sort of measures we require folks to take when they're using drones.
Thanks. So I'm going to give you one last, one last question before we move on to question 3, and hopefully just a short response. So Irma says that they're not familiar with the use of drones, but sort of are supposing that the product concentration will be higher than other methods of applications that are used, and they're wondering if this is correct.
Yeah, it seems just because the drone has a much smaller sort of tank than conventional application equipment. And my sort of understanding is that it goes on at a sort of lower water volume, so less sort of dilute. So and there are sort of particular risks that are associated with handling more concentrated product.
I think that's a very important point for participants to be aware of. So thanks for that. So just as we're transitioning into the last question, is there also going to be a recommendation of what types of pesticides not to use for drone spraying? So for example, I'm thinking of pesticides that are classified as highly hazardous pesticides, which are being used in many low and middle income countries that are already banned in high income countries. So is there going to be any recommendation coming out from the OECD, for example, on the types of pesticides not to use in drone application?
It hasn't sort of featured at all in the sorts of discussions that we've had at the moment. You say the focus is very much on sort of risk rather than hazard. So it's not a subject that we've sort of considered including. Andrea, thanks.
Thank you. Then that's a point that we'll be sure to pick up on with maybe in JMPM about looking at the hazards. So thank you. So we will post the comments that have been put in the poll in the digest. So thank you everyone who's posted, and we'll move on to our final question for today. So we'll move on to question 3 and over to you. Thanks, Grant.
Which is on the question of equipment. So this is a sort of material sort of marked up in yellow in the document, and quite a lot of this, anyway, to me is very sort of technical and detailed. So again, any sort of help that folks who are more familiar with the technical issues would be sort of very much sort of appreciated. So you see that the guidance starts with the description of the goal. That's just to make sure that the spray solution is dispersed to the target, and that it's uniform, and that it's sort of delivered at the rate that's specified on the product label for maximum effect and safety. So there's guidance on when calibration should be conducted. Say at the start of a season, a job requiring a different equipment setup, or where changes or repairs are made to the machine. There's then a section on conducting a visual scan of the spray components, and there's 13 different elements listed, including the tank, the pump, the boom, the nozzles, the batteries, any spare parts, and some guidance on looking out for any sort of damage or wear and tear that may have been caused to the equipment. Then moves on with a section on preparations specific to the spray job that's to be undertaken. So working out the application volume, nozzle choice, pump, the nozzle flow rates, and the boom setups. And again, this sort of business of getting the correct sort of swath, and then avoiding any sort of undesirable interactions with the airframe of the drones. And there's a lot of very sort of detailed guidance on the swath width issue. On calibration itself, the guidance contains a description of how decisions on ground speed, swath width, and flow rates can all sort of play a role. Then sets out sort of 10 steps to setting up the equipment, including a reference to making sure that the nozzles are performing in a suitably sort of uniform sort of fashion. They'll calculate the flow rate and the area to be sprayed per minute, looking at the application rate and verifying the deposition rate, perhaps even doing a test run before actually applying the chemical. So for this section, I want you to sort of consider sort of the following question and the sort of two polls, and they focus on sort of calibration, which has long been sort of identified within the OECD sort of drone subgroup and at the conference as perhaps the key issue when it comes to operation of the machinery. So firstly, the question, what guidance is currently available to pesticide users in your country on the importance of sort of calibration and how to conduct calibration exercises? And then for the polls, we're sort of interested in your views on whether you think that the guidance we see here on calibration of drones would be understood and is able to be carried out by pesticide users in your country, and whether it is making, or the guidance is making, suitable recommendations on the frequency of conducting calibration exercises. So question and a couple of polls there, and again, very interested for your feedback. Thank you.
Thank you, Grant. So if we could have question one, thank you. I'll let you read it and continue posting responses, and we'll shortly put the poll up. I'm just trying to look back at some of the questions that have been coming in. So Bruce asks an interesting question about why is drone spraying not embraced in all countries? And perhaps you could reflect on the fact that many countries have actually banned aerial spraying, and are countries that have banned aerial spraying now going to allow drone spraying from what you're seeing?
I think Europe is quite an interesting sort of case study with this one, Andre. I mean, aerial spraying is notionally banned in the EU, although there is a derogation that allows it to be undertaken in certain specific circumstances. Now, the EU, I think it's in response to the emerging evidence that we're seeing as a result of the OECD work, is proposing to create a derogation from this ban on aerial spraying for drones, and that's on the basis that the drift from the risk of exposures from drift for drones is significantly less than that from helicopters and aircraft. So certainly in sort of Europe, there's an understanding and a regulatory sort of reaction to the evidence on the degree of risk that exists from drones, and sort of distinguishing it from other forms of aerial application. So I can't speak for other countries, unfortunately. I know sort of regulators that we sort of speak to very much in the evidence sort of game. It's about sort of understanding the risk, and if they are satisfied that they understand the risks and that exposures are not going to cause harm or unacceptable effects, then it's a use of pesticide products that they are prepared to consider authorizing. Thanks.
Thanks for that. Yeah, and I think it's important, especially we've got a lot of representation in this discussion today from low and middle income countries. And, you know, as I highlighted before, there's a lot of pesticides being used that are banned in other countries. And so it's important, I think, for those regulators to take into account the hazards so that it's not just a risk scenario. Pindile has a question. Will the safe and effective use of drones not result in overuse of pesticides, which ultimately negatively impacts on the environment? And are there any measures in place to avoid this, or studies to be undertaken, especially once this gains traction? I know you've touched a bit on this, so you can just touch on what aspect you'd like to of that question.
Yeah, I mean, there's sort of two elements to it, isn't there? There's sort of drone technology sort of replacing sort of existing forms of of application. And you see that sort of drones have got the potential for very sort of precise and well-timed sort of forms of application. So if they're just sort of replacing existing forms of application, that shouldn't result in an increase in pesticide use. The alternative is that drones are then used to apply pesticides where pesticides may not have been applied in the past, say because it's a very sort of it's an area or a scenario where traditional application equipment wasn't able to access, but the assurance that's in place there is that use of the pesticide sort of product, the risks that are associated with that will have been assessed, so there should be no harm to human health or adverse effects on the environment resulting from a product that's applied by drone in accordance with the product label.
Thanks for that. I think we'll move on to the next poll, given we've got 15 minutes left for our discussion. So do you think that guidance on calibration of drone equipment will be understood by pesticide users in your country? There have been quite a few comments in the chat already that calibration is taught in some countries, when people are being trained on pesticide application. Obviously, it's not for drones. So, the question will be then, if you're licensed for drone application of pesticides, presumably you'd be trained on calibration, but should everyone who is a pesticide control operator be trained on calibration of drones?
Is that a question for me, or Andre? Yeah.
Well, you're welcome to comment on that. You don't have to. I mean, the question is, is how widely should calibration of drones be trained? Should people be learning?
Yeah, it's certainly those who are sort of conducting or planning spray operations, isn't it? I mean, you would say that's an absolutely essential sort of skill that you understand how to ensure that the correct amount of product is being applied to the target area, and if that's not happening, there's increased risks to human health and the environment. There's a danger that the product won't actually do the job it was sort of designed to do, and you have unnecessary pesticide use. So a very sort of key piece of learning I would sort of add voice to sort of my opinion on that one.
Thanks for that. And you can see the comments coming through on the poll. A question.
I'm encouraged to see the amount of sort of comment in chat that goes on in the margins. I'm sorry, I can't keep sort of track with everything that's going through, but I see especially sort of Sarah seems to be sort of on top of things and adding a lot of sort of helpful sort of commentary for folks. So thanks very much for that, Sarah.
Yeah, and that's why I've been pulling out the questions for you, because it's a bit much to keep track of. Yeah. I guess the question is, we're always looking at things to be better and safer and to have a less of a risk and reduce exposures and harm to humans and the environment. And I guess the ultimate question is, will drone application do that, or is it going to create more complexities for us in our regulations?
Yeah, it's certainly got the potential to sort of require bits of sort of regulation to work in a different way, and it sometimes puts certain challenges to us as sort of regulator. But that's no bad thing. I mean, the world sort of moves on, sort of technology moves on, sort of knowledge moves on. I think that sort of headline sort of view with drones, there's a recognition that these and other sort of new technologies, they have the potential to improve the precision and timeliness of pesticide authorizations, of pesticide use. but that sort of protection of sort of human health and the environment from the hazardous properties of pesticide product, that remains the primary aim of pesticide sort of regulation. But say if we've got technologies that can help pesticides to be applied in a safer and sustainable use, I think it's sort of incumbent upon us as sort of regulators to explore ways in which we can facilitate the adoption of those sort of technologies. I think there are sort of challenges for us as sort of regulators, but it's sort of incumbent upon us to sort of deliver a regulatory system that delivers the best sort of benefits for society in terms of having access to chemistry which is going to improve the quality of life for people, but without exposing them to unacceptable risks. So that's a big challenge for us as sort of regulators with everything that we do all the time, but particularly in sort of relation to the sort of new technologies agenda, of which drones are part. Thanks.
Thanks for that. Yeah, as you know, the point that I've made already, I think, you know, what is important for regulators from low and middle income countries is really to be quite aware of highly hazardous pesticides. And as the point that you made, Grant, it's, you know, first and foremost, it's the regulation of the pesticides, irrespective of what they're in what application equipment they're being used in. Yeah. And so that's why we continue the work on removal of highly hazardous pesticides. There's a lot of comments coming in.
Excellent.
So I think we'll move on to the final poll for today. And I'll give you a chance to respond to those questions in the or comments in the digest. So the last poll for today is, does the guidance make suitable recommendations on frequency of calibration? Again, it assumes that you have read the document, and if you say not sure, I'm assuming that means you didn't read the document. So,
is that 2 people so far? Yeah. Again, I would say, I mean, if folks haven't had the chance to read the document for this meeting, but they do sort of afterwards go away and sort of read it, and if they do have any thoughts on any of these questions, by all means get in touch, send them to us, because this will all be sort of useful sort of information that I can sort of feed back to the industry team that are putting the draft together, so that we can ensure we get the best possible sort of document as a result of this engagement. Because this chat we're having here this afternoon is very sort of invaluable for us in reaching out to a very sort of wide audience of folks that we may not have necessarily had the opportunity to get in touch with, sort of, Andrea. So just to sort of reiterate that point, please get in touch with us sort of afterwards with any sort of comments if you have them after having a chance to read the document.
Yes, and once the digest has come out, I think your contact details are also provided. You can also indicate who you would like, whose contact details you'd like on the digest. We do encourage those of you who are participating today in the discussion to read the digests, because we do summarize the discussions, and we give the presenters an opportunity to respond to any questions or comments or give further detail that they didn't have an opportunity to do during this discussion. So the digest will be out in a few weeks' time, and I encourage you to look at it then. And Grant, I'm also going to chat to you about, you know, linking you up with the FAO with this new guidance document or guidance note that they want to put out on drones, which I think is extremely important for low and middle income country regulators to you've mentioned so many issues that need to be taken into account for drone application and the things that are being discussed in your guidance documents at the moment.
Super, yeah, it sounds like a very sort of useful link to make, Andrea. Thanks.
So there's continued comments about calibration and environmental impacts going on in the chat.
I did see the easy one from Natasha asking if she's happy, if sort of Rachel and I would be happy to share our email addresses here, and yes, we are, Natasha. So you can do that one.
Yeah, and I think the poll that's on the screen is really showing that quite a lot of people haven't read the document. So perhaps today's discussion will encourage people to have a look, even to skim the document. And if you have questions related to that, then to reach out to Grant or Rachel.
Yeah.
So I see that the emails have now been posted in the chat. If you have any further questions for Grant, please do post them. I can see that there's a lot of comments at the moment. Yeah, I guess the interesting thing will be who uses the drones. I know at the moment in South Africa, from what I'm aware of, what's being done is that there are licensed drone operators and farmers will contact them. So they're not necessarily specialists in pesticide use, but they are specialists in drone applications, drone use. And they're being hired then by agricultural farmers. And I'm wondering if that's the way it's going to continue, that there'll be just specialized people who do the drone application rather than kind of a broad spectrum use by all farmers, that all farmers use drones. Whether will it be particular spray operators that will do this?
It certainly, that seems to sort of mirror the model that we see here in the UK. We have drone operating companies who have used drones for a variety of sort of purposes, but have sort of identified the agricultural use scenario as a potential new market for them. And that kind of sort of mirrors sort of what's gone on generally with sort of pesticide sort of spraying in the UK. That the move is been away from individual farmers doing their own spraying operations to employing specialist sort of spray contractors. So if sort of drone spraying does become a big commercial sort of enterprise in the UK, my sort of feel is that the model may be that specialist spray contracting companies will be employed by the farming community to conduct those sort of spray jobs, rather than farmers themselves buying drones and doing their own spraying. But again, just my sort of personal sort of view on how things might sort of develop in the UK.
So thank you very much, Grant. We are slowly coming to, or quickly actually, coming to an end of a very important discussion. We had over 80 people on, lots of comments and questions, and this is really an important discussion that we will continue to have. So thank you very much again for your time and for your team in the background who was supporting you. We really appreciate it, and we'll continue to be in touch. Just a reminder again to everyone to look out for the digest. If you haven't signed up for the Pesticide Discussion Forum, you won't receive the digest, so please do sign up. Note that the next discussion we will be having is on the 29th of June. Do we have the title for that, Natasha, for the 29th of June?
Not yet, that's still to be confirmed.
Okay, but we do have a speaker, I believe, for that. So thank you. And I'd like to say thank you to all the participants. Do remember to sign up for the newsletter as well. So we have a pesticide newsletter that comes out every couple of weeks that covers all sorts of latest research and policy issues. So please do sign up for that. And thanks again to everyone for this important discussion. I wish you a good day wherever you are, and stay safe, or warm or cool, whichever the climate should be. And thanks again, Grant. Take care. Bye for now.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, everyone. Bye.